Hi, I'm Heather James, conference producer at Technology Networks, and I'm here to introduce our next talk, How Process Intelligence and AI Drive Better Outcomes in Pharma with a Digital Twin. Please join me in welcoming Shoeb Javed, who brings broad expertise in intelligent automation, process intelligence, and enterprise software. His work centers around collaborating with digital transformation leaders to achieve meaningful business outcomes. With his deep knowledge and passion for helping businesses thrive in the digital age, Shoaib will be sharing valuable insights today that are sure to inspire and inform. Following the presentation, we will also have a Q&A session, and we welcome any questions that you may have. Please ask questions using the Q&A system to the right-hand side of the video player. I will now hand over to Shoaib to begin his presentation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session. So today we're going to discuss how we can use process intelligence and AI to build what's called a digital twin of an organization, or in short, DTO, and how that digital twin can help produce better outcomes for companies in the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm Shoeb Javed, Chief Product Officer for iGraphics, and I will briefly go over the agenda first, and then we can get into it. So first, we will discuss, the headwinds facing the pharmaceutical industry and where we believe that we can add value through technology. We'll then look at, what are those key value drivers that we can impact, and then how we can go about constructing a digital twin of an organization. What's involved, what are the technologies, how to go about implementing it. And then we can look at some specific use cases where we can apply the digital twin to improve some set of outcomes for the business. We'll do a couple of technology spotlights, around simulation and process mining, predictive analytics, and then we can go to Q&A. Okay, so let's start with the macro view. So there are a lot of headwinds that the pharmaceutical industry in general is facing, right? The two main things are that the cost of developing a drug, that successfully makes it to the market is very high. And despite these very high costs, the success rates remain dismally low, right? So you're spending a lot of money to get a drug into the market, but you have no guarantee that you will actually do that, right? So that's an area that's of big concern to all pharmaceutical companies. The other area that is a concern also is, the regulatory requirements are becoming increasingly complex, right? They are fragmented, they're different for different geographies, and the amount of time it takes to handle those is increasingly difficult, plus actually meeting those requirements also is increasingly difficult, right? So besides those two main things, there are other areas that companies have to consider, right? For example, supply chain disruptions, right? How AI is going to impact drug discovery, right? And a number of other issues like, patent expirations, generic competition, those kind of things. So let's look at, given this kind of environment, where we can make impact to help improve these outcomes. Okay, so what I've done here is I've taken the value drivers for pharma and kind of divided it up into three buckets, right? So the first one is improving productivity, which means getting a faster time to market based on the development cycles and transitions of phases, right? Getting the success rate up, right? Making sure that we have more drugs that go through the pipeline and come out on the other end. And also we are able to actually cut short our investment much earlier in the cycle, right? As opposed to going all the way through and then finding out that the drug doesn't get approved, right? Increase the number of applications and number of drugs in the pipeline, right? Lower patient recruitment time for trials, decrease the regulatory submission time. So again, everything tied to increasing productivity in general. The second bucket is on, how do we impact costs, right? And again, these could be automating manual tasks, right? Outsourcing, reducing costs for the clinical phase or cost per patient, right? Or reducing in general overhead and operational costs or manufacturing costs. And then the last one, of course, is compliance, right? So again, how do we get good laboratory practice, right? How do we actually document compliance more effectively? How do we get through audits faster, right? How do we automate compliance submissions, and show how those compliance requirements are mapped to the processes that we actually execute on a day-to-day basis, right? So all the tasks that are associated with compliance, how can we improve them, right? So if you take those three buckets for value drivers, like improving productivity, reducing costs, and ensuring compliance, then how does process intelligence and process technology help you to do that? Okay. All right. So let's look at that journey, right, from the process intelligence or the process improvement perspective. And that journey is divided up into three parts, right? So the first part is basically trying to discover your business process, which means understanding how you do business today. So the idea here is, can you gain objective visibility into how your processes actually run in reality? Can you then find inefficiencies or bottlenecks or opportunities for improvement? And then also look at, where you might be deviating from your standard process when you're actually executing those processes in the real world, right? So that's how you uncover failure points in implemented controls. Okay, so that's part one, is to understand. Part two then is, once you do have an understanding, you can use that understanding, that baseline, to drive a better process design, right? So here you can collaborate with the various stakeholders, right? That could be business, that could be IT, that could be compliance, to design more effective processes. You can then quantify some of your KPIs, and performance goals that can be mapped or overlaid on your new process designs. And also make sure that the new process designs are compliant with your internal as well as external regulations, okay? So that's part two, right? So you understand your processes, then you design better ones, and then once you have done that, you can then optimize continuously, right? So here what you do is, when you deploy your new processes into production, you can monitor these processes as they run. You can then continuously improve those processes, right? So you can now understand how they're working with the new designs, create a new baseline, and then repeat, right? So once you take a new design, run it in production, that now becomes your new baseline, from which you can then continue this process, right? So it's a circular process of understanding uh, your existing uh, outcomes, designing better processes to achieve better outcomes, measuring whether those designs actually do that, and then using that result as the new baseline to go start over again, okay? So let's break that three-step process down in more details on various components of technology that apply in each of those phases, right? So you take business operations on the left-hand side, and you create business values as you go through that pipeline. So let's break that down a bit. So in the discover part, you can use process mining and task mining solutions, right? So what's process mining? Process mining actually takes data from your backend systems, from your IT systems, from your enterprise applications, and uses that data to reverse engineer process flows, and then show you visually how those processes are functioning. Task mining does the same thing, except taking data from backend systems. It actually takes data from your desktops, from the way your employees do business. It takes that data and then converts it into process insights. So once you get that discovery, you can also then analyze it, and you can look at risks, you can look at bottlenecks and things of that nature, right? So those solutions for process mining, task mining, process mapping, risk analytics, they get you that discovery. Now, once you have that, on the design side, right, you have software that helps you model processes. It creates value stream mappings. It looks at your entire customer journey from start to end. It can also help you do simulations on your process. A simulation is a what-if analysis that says, how will my design actually work in the real world? And it can also do risk management, right? Which means it can actually create areas on the process where there are risks. It can create controls and mitigation strategies. It can do reporting and so on, right? So that's how it actually does risk management for you. And then on the optimized side, you have solutions that do automation. And again, there are multiple kinds of automation. There is workflow automation, there is RPA, there is agentic automation through AI. You can also integrate with various enterprise applications. And then you can also do process monitoring and predictive analytics, right? So process monitoring is when you're looking at your processes in production, and predictive analytics lets you predict how your process will perform, your incomplete processes will perform, right? So if you have performed, say, 5 steps of a 50-step process, you can say how the other 45 steps are going to go, and you can head off problems before they occur, right? So that's what predictive analytics does. So you have various technologies that can be used in the different 3 phases of process optimization. But what's also important is not just to have those individual pieces of technology, but also to integrate them together through a centralized process repository, right? So if you have a single source of truth for all your processes, the way you do business, then that makes this whole journey a lot simpler, right? So you can take information from discovery, feed it into design. You can take information from design, feed it into optimization, and so on, right? So having this AI-enabled process repository that connects the pieces together from discover, design, and optimization helps you now create a holistic digital twin of your organization, right? So you now know every aspect of how you do business, who is doing it, what systems are involved, what metrics you want to measure, how data flows through those systems, through those processes, and then how to actually take your business operations and improve business value as you go along. Okay, so that's what's called a DTO, or a digital twin of an organization. Okay. So how does this digital twin help you improve, right? So let's go through some examples of how the digital twin can be applied, for example, in clinical development. So let's start there, right? So first thing you can do, right, is you can start to map processes, your processes from various systems, like your CTMS systems, right, or other backend systems. You can get event logs. You can measure your current performance. It will show you how long it's taking you to recruit. What are your enrollment rates. You can also identify risks. For example, you can say, okay, where are there deviations from standard procedures? Is there non-compliant behavior? You can analyze also variations, right? Because when you do run process mining, you find that you're doing things a lot of different ways where you may not have intended to do that because of limitations in systems or because people do things differently. So it gives you an opportunity to analyze why you have process variations and be able to standardize and say, no, I don't want those variations. I maybe only want 2 or 3 variations as opposed to 20, right? So that helps you visualize and see it and then improve it, right? So on the process design side, right, again, you can collaborate between the various stakeholders to take this information and say, okay, how do we want our processes to really function? You can then define your performance goals, KPIs, and you can overlay them on top of your designs. You can also align your processes to risk goals, right? The risk KPIs, right? Make sure that you're handling adverse events, you have controls defined, you have safety standards. You can also align processes to resources, right? So you can say, okay, well, which people are going to execute which parts of the process, what systems are used, what assets are used. You can also have cost informations. You can have performance information. So you can have a whole lot of KPIs and associated metrics when you actually do your process design. And then for simulation, once you have a process design and once you know all the steps you do to do something, you can test it, right? So you can run different data through it. You can run what if scenarios. You can, for example, look at different trial protocols, different recruitment strategies, see which one works better. And again, the simulation will help you align your resource allocation to the KPIs that are most important to you, right? So you can tell the simulation, I want to optimize for a certain KPI. It will then adjust all your resources and will adjust your process designs to actually optimize the KPIs that you're most interested in. And of course, you can have multiple different simulations and trials to get the most optimal allocation of resources to help achieve the outcomes that you're looking for. Okay, so that's a use case for clinical development. Okay, so the next use case would be for regulatory review and approval. So here again, right, the first part is mining the process. So again, you can use multiple systems in which your process is executing. You can use your regulatory information management systems too, your document control systems. You can collect data from that to mine your regulatory workflows. You can measure compliance, right? You can see whether the real world process is actually conforming to your design. And you can say, look, this is how things are supposed to work. Are they actually working the way I have designed my processes? Most times people find out that they're not. So there might be some extra steps, or there might be steps that are skipped. And therefore now you can tighten up the way you execute these processes so that actually it does go through all the controls and meets all your requirements, right? You can also analyze and identify compliance risks like missing information, deviation, and so forth, right? And of course, you can also analyze the process variations, right? Because the variations might be required because of fragmented compliance, and you need to see, okay, what's that costing you, and how to streamline that compliance and those variations so that you have the minimal possible variations that are required. Okay. And then again, we talked about design, right? So in the case of regulatory review and approval, what the designs do is it allows you to have a full documentation of your process so that when auditors ask you to show them how you do something and show them the collected metrics and KPIs and data, you could do so easily, right? What you could also do is you can say, look, there's a change in a compliance requirement. So based on that change, you can find out which business processes are impacted because you know that you're assigning this compliance standard to a number of your processes, but that standard changes, all the processes that are in scope. You can then say, okay, fine, I looked at the changes, I applied them to my processes. I found that 5 processes don't need to change, they remain the same, but then the 6th one does. And then this is how I've changed it. So all of that thread can then be easily documented and shown to your auditors, and you can cut your audit times and improve your conformance to your compliance quite significantly if you actually document your process designs in a single process repository. And for simulations, again, you can run different kinds of simulations here. You can say, okay, what happens when data comes into my process and when they are executed, are all the controls effective, right? Am I hitting the risk points? And if I do hit a risk point, can I measure the effectiveness of the control that's associated with the risk, right? So you can run simulations for risk management and make sure that you get the right outcomes as you run through those before you actually deploy processes into production. Okay. The third use case, this is much more of a standard one. It's not just for pharmaceutical industry. It could be for any industry, right? How do I actually optimize my manufacturing processes? So same thing here, right? You have back-end systems like ERP systems, right? Or MES manufacturing systems, right? You can actually map out your manufacturing processes. You can look at quality, you can look at supply chain deliverables, you can analyze variations. So here you can look at your entire supply chain, your entire manufacturing process, and then optimize the manufacturing process, right? And again, you can associate any number of resources, right? So you can associate plant resources, you can associate systems, you can associate people, you can associate costs. You can say, okay, well, if I did automation here, how would that impact my overall production, right? How would it impact my warehouse management? So any number of processes that are associated with manufacturing, distribution, supply chain can be mapped out, can be discovered, and then they can be optimized for various metrics, right? And then again, simulation can help you do the same thing. They can help you reconfigure personnel. They can help you with system configurations. They can help you with asset management. They can help you with identifying, areas that impact inventory. So any number of things that are associated with your manufacturing processes can be optimized at KPI as KPIs by running different simulation inputs through them and then understanding the outcomes and optimizing them, right? So we looked at this, right, and said, okay, fine, we had clinical trials, we had manufacturing, we had compliance. Like those are only three scenarios out of many that can be used in a similar fashion to optimize various aspects of the pharmaceutical industry, right? So here, the process intelligence technology, the AI, the digital twin of an organization, the simulation, the predictive analytics, they all help you incrementally improve a number of KPIs and then rebaseline and continue, right? Having that digital twin means that you can actually tinker with it and make changes to it without spending a lot of money, without having to actually do it in production and then finding out that it doesn't work. You can find out much more quickly whether something works or doesn't work before you spend money to actually run it or deploy it in production. Okay. So couple of technology highlights now, right? So we talked a lot about simulation. So let's look at what simulation actually is and what that lets you do. So what simulation does is, there's an engine behind simulation. It's called a discrete event simulation engine. So what you do is you run a number of events and data through a set of processes, and it helps you make different decisions, right? So it describes customer specific trends, it's synced with customer schedules, and it helps you contextualize process modeling, right? And the data, the input data that you run through simulation can come from process mining, right? Because the task times, right? How long it takes you to do something, how many activities there are, other metrics, attributes, measurements associated with the data can be obtained through your backend systems, and that data can then be run through your processes, right? And then anyone can do it, right? It's straightforward enough that anybody can simulate scenarios and then see how to optimize for something. So let's look at the various aspects, right? Let's start with decision support. So here you can say, okay, what is the return on investment for buying a particular large piece of equipment? How will my costs be impacted if I swap something that's non-recyclable with a recyclable material, or uh, for ESG purposes, right? For environmental reasons. You can then also do what if analysis. You can say, okay, what if the customer impact? What's the customer impact if we deploy AI agents in our call center, right? What if I reallocate personnel to adjust seasonal needs? So again, you can say, look, if I'm getting into a certain season and I need to add more employees, will it really help me, right? And also, where should I add them? Or for example, if I have a drug for which there's a high demand, how can I ramp up production of that drug? Which resource would have the most impact in increasing that output that I'm looking for? It can also do predictions and projections. It can say, look, how much can sales increase, before we have bottlenecks in delivery. So for example, it's good to sell more and it's good to manufacture more, but if you're not able to deliver it, then it's just sitting in a warehouse, right? So building inventory. So again, those kind of things can be modeled, right? Uh, and again, you can also say, look, if I am resource constrained and I work under the current sort of investment, how much will my backlog build, right? How much will my production backlog build? And, How will my customer support be impacted because of that production backlog building and then my delivery times extending out? So those things can also be simulated across your processes. And then finally, right, you can do root cause analysis. So you can say, if you have a bottleneck, why is the bottleneck there? Is it because you have an imbalance in your teams, right? Or is it because of real resource constraints? So you may not have a resource constraint. It may just be that you haven't moved or shuffled the resources in the right spots. And if you just rearrange how you invest your resources, that could help you, right? You can also figure out, okay, if I do have a slowdown and certain materials don't get manufactured properly, why is that happening, right? What steps in the process are slowing down? Where is that bottleneck that's causing the slowdown in delivery? So again, it's very comprehensive what you can do, and you can simulate almost anything across almost any process as long as you have the right data to run through those simulations for the process, right? So this is a very powerful tool that would actually help you really improve pretty much any aspect of your business, right? Whether that includes productivity, or it includes cost, or it includes uh, end user satisfaction, right? Or it includes compliance, right? So simulation as a technology can help you do all these things. Okay. So let's look at the next technology highlight, right? So this is predictive analytics, right? So what we do here is you can see a process, for example, that has gone through a few steps. And then what happens is, as we look at the execution of this process, say hundreds of thousands of times, or maybe even millions of times, we can then predict how the process is going to go based on how it's already gone, right? So you can make predictions about time, right, for every future event. How long will a task take? What's the interduration task? You can make these predictions based on highly accurate, statistical models and machine learning algorithms. You can then basically say, look, I've skipped a compliance step early on in my process, which means when I get to almost the end, it's going to be rejected. And because it's going to be rejected really late, it's going to cost me a lot of money. And therefore, I don't want to continue. I want to stop now. I want to go back. I want to fix the compliance problem and then continue, right? As opposed to continuing with what I have today, right? That's one aspect. The other is, I'm likely to miss a delivery deadline based on how my process has performed so far, which means that I need to do something now, right? I either need to fix the process, I need to accelerate it, or I need to inform the client that my delivery will be missed, right? So predictive analytics will help you do this. And this is automatic, right? You don't have to do a lot to get it. It's actually learning based on execution of your processes. It's then training models and retraining them, and it's getting better as it sees more and more processes, and then it actually shows you more and more results for more attributes and more parameters within the model for prediction. Okay, so that's predictive analytics. Okay, all right. So let me now end with a real world example, right? So this is a large global pharmaceutical company, and they started looking at process intelligence when they were coming across a confluence of two or three different things that they, was like a perfect storm. So they had issues with their supply chain. Procurement was inefficient. They had very long delays in procuring the materials that they needed to produce their medicine, right? And that was causing delays and problems, and they were not able to fulfill demand for their products, right? In addition to that, right, they had a company mandate to take 40 different process workflows that were documented and running in SharePoint, and they had to model them, improve them, and re-implement them so that they better met their needs. Now, the original deadline to do that was about a year and a half, but then suddenly they learned that Microsoft was sunsetting the SharePoint workflow engine. So now they only had 7 months to do that, right? So 7 months to make sure that all of those 40 process workflows were re-implemented. And also, all of this was happening during the development of a new drug release with a target date, right? So, a strict target date, and failure to meet that target would result in, 1 million euro of loss daily, a daily loss of 1 million euros if you didn't deliver that drug on time, as well as the financial and reputational risk associated with, failing to meet those deadlines, right? So they selected iGraphics Process 360 Live, which is a solution that we provide that has process mining, process design, and simulation. They started with a very small team, and then they rapidly scaled up as they got wins. They created an automation workbench, where they had employees that would submit automation ideas, where they would be analyzed and implemented and prioritized. And then they were able to monitor performance of things that were implemented and automated, via API data, and then that whole project was completed in a 7-month time frame, right? So then they ended up having a very nice centralized repository of business processes. They had automated workflows. They could monitor, right? The processes became more agile. They could react to, various resources being available or not being available. They got a much bigger remit for doing more with process management, right? And again, so they ended up saving a lot of effort and time, but also they were able to meet their goals, which was to deliver that product, that drug on time, which would then prevent their more than 1 million euro of loss daily, which was averted, right? So again, deploying these technologies in the right way with the right objectives can produce some very significant business outcome. And so I would encourage everyone that is listening to this session to look at some of the technologies I talked about. Also, if you want to look at what iGraphics provides in this area, please feel free to contact us, contact me directly, and we can help you with any questions that you may have. All right. So with that, I would like to address some of the questions that have come in. So I will hand it over to the moderator to go through those questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that fascinating presentation, Shoaib. As with all the talks, we're likely to have lots of questions from the audience, and I can see that we have received some already, so I'll get straight onto the Q&A now. So your first question here is, how does the integration of AI enhance the capabilities of DTOs in predicting and mitigating risks within pharma?
Yeah. So what we can do with AI in this area is to actually anticipate compliance problems before they actually occur, right? Through predictions. So the idea here is, right, that we are learning patterns of execution of your processes as they occur, and a combination of process mining and AI can tell you that there might likely be a compliance issue, even though it's not explicit, right? So that actually helps you get alerted and start digging a bit deeper to say that there might probably be an issue, even though it appears that explicitly there isn't one, right? So that's, I think, where AI can really help with compliance.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Another great question that we've had here is, how do DTOs streamline processes like preparing for FDA inspections or ensuring compliance with EU clinical trial regulations?
Yeah, so DTOs allow you to look at what if scenarios for modifying processes, right? So if you take source data that goes into a process and you tweak the process a bit, you say, okay, what happens if I change this, or what happens if I add more people here, or what happens if I automate a particular task? The DTO will allow you to virtually make those changes, run through simulations, and then when you have the right outcomes, then and only then do you have to actually spend money implementing it, right? So that's, I think, a big advantage of what a DTO can do for you.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Another great question that we've had here is, what specific metrics or KPIs should pharma companies focus on when using DTOs to optimize processes?
Yeah, so again, right, I would recommend a smaller number of meaningful metrics. And it's hard to answer this question generically, right? I know that a lot of people ask this question. The metrics will depend on what matters to you, right? And they're really important because if you don't define the right outcomes, then your efforts wouldn't really lead to something meaningful, right? So for us, the metrics typically fall, like I said, into three categories, right? They would be either in the category of um, capacity, right? How can I produce more product more efficiently, or how can I handle more drugs in the pipeline, those kind of things. Or they could be in the cost area, right? But how do I improve manufacturing costs, or how do I improve clinical trial costs? So those would be in the cost area, uh, or they would be in the regulatory compliance, right? Now, of course, there's the end user satisfaction area, but since it's pharma and it's a regulated industry, I think you should look at compliance metrics, right, to make sure that you have identified all the possible risks and the mitigation strategies, and be able to run reports on those risks and mitigations on a periodic basis. So those are the things I would consider.
Perfect. Thank you. We've had lots of great questions, so I'm going to hop straight into the next one. And that is, how can process simulation within a DTO framework be used to improve decision making in drug manufacturing?
Yeah. So as I talked through in the session, there are various aspects of manufacturing a drug, right? So again, all the way from sourcing the materials, right? Then going through the production process, and then going through the distribution process, right? So simulation can help in all those areas, right? So you can simulate to say, okay, well, if I had additional plant, for example, a manufacturing plant, what does that do to my production capacity versus my cost, right? And would I be able to operate them at the same time? Right? Or for example, you can look at certain tasks in your manufacturing process and say, what would happen if I automated this task and cut time to do that? And you can do that. You can also say, look, if I have the ability to hire 20 people, what is the best way to distribute those resources across the various divisions, that are involved in manufacturing my product? To achieve a certain outcome, right? But the outcome could be, whether I want to manufacture more, I want to manufacture it less expensively, or I need to cut the amount of time it takes to do so. So you can have different metrics where you can do what if scenarios, and simulation helps you do all of those.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Another great question for pharma companies here. So, for pharma companies just starting their digital transformation journey, what's the first step in building a DTO to ensure long-term success?
Say, right, you start with some kind of process management solution that at least allows you to document your business processes, right? And there are various ways you can get to that, right? You can provide input from your pre-existing standard operating procedures or process documentation, right? So you can suck in all the information that you already have, establish a process baseline, get a centralized process repository. So what this does is it at least allows you to see what you have today, right? Now you can augment that with process mining, right? So you can say, okay, I can also use process mining to do some of that discovery, right? That way I don't have to do manual documentation. I don't have to, do these planning sessions to put the information in. You can get process mining to help you put that information into the repository, then you can look at it. So the first step is to build this process repository that actually has information about your processes.
Excellent, thank you. Another question that we've got here is, who are the common stakeholders and sponsors for pharma DTO initiatives?
Yeah, so it depends on the company again, right? So a lot of these initiatives could be within the operations part, right? So the chief operating officer organization, right? It could be within business units. So it could be within various divisions. There could be a centralized process center of excellence. Of course, you have various compliance departments, right? So in some cases, the stakeholders are compliance and compliance departments, the process center of excellence. But in others, it could be the chief operating officer or operations departments for operational KPIs. So it varies from company to company.
Excellent, thank you. And I think we've got time for one final question here for you, and that is, can you explain how a DTO could improve a specific process like clinical trials?
Yeah. I mean, for clinical trials, right, again, the idea is, how do you recruit people for the trial? How long does it take, right? How do you ensure that you have the right set of documentation and compliance, the management requirement being handled and so on, right? So again, every step of that process can be improved with a DTO because A, you understand what you're doing. So you can see everything that you do from the start of the clinical trial to the end of the clinical trial. And therefore you can see, how many people you need, how long it's going to take, what's going to happen. And every business activity or every activity associated with that trial, you can look at and improve with the DTO. You can say, okay, fine, I can automate some things, I can uh, reduce or eliminate certain steps. I know where the bottlenecks are because I can see the process and I can see where typical bottlenecks have occurred in past clinical trials. You can get all the data and analyze it. So you can look at not just what you want to do, but you can also look at what has been done before and learn from some of the things that were done and the bottlenecks that were seen in the past to actually then improve what you want to do in the future.
Excellent. Thank you so, so much for those insightful answers. Unfortunately, that's all that we have time for today. Any questions that we didn't have time to get to will get sent to the speaker after the event. As with all the other talks in this event, this talk will now be available to view whenever you want for the next 30 days. That just leaves me to say thank you again, Shoeb, and we'll be back soon with the next talk.
Thank you.